The lake was the only reason I stayed in this neighborhood. Not the manicured lawns. Not the exclusive HOA-approved landscaping or the overpriced homes with their faux rustic shutters. The lake was my sanctuary, calm water tucked behind a ridge of pines, a place where I could breathe, fish, and remind myself why I tolerated living under the watchful eye of Karen Whitmore. But 3 weeks ago, they stole it from me. Karen, the HOA president, a woman who strutted through the community like she personally invented property law, decided that my lake access path, the same dirt road marked on my deed, the same road I'd used since I bought this place, was suddenly non-compliant with community safety regulations. Community safety, she said, standing in my driveway with her clipboard like she was delivering a government decree. This road encourages unauthorized visitors. It's not in the best interest of the neighborhood to have free, uncontrolled access to the lake. It's my access road, Karen, I told her, holding up the worn survey papers that had been in my family for decades. This road predates your HOA by 30 years. Karen's smile didn't budge. Her blonde bob didn't move either, it never did. I understand you feel that way, but the board voted unanimously to place a barrier until we can conduct a full compliance review. The next morning, a steel gate appeared at the entrance to the trail. Bright orange HOA warning signs flapped in the breeze like they were marking a crime scene. Private access, HOA members only. Violators will be fined. I stood there, gripping the padlocked chain looped through the gate, my fishing gear still in hand. For 20 minutes, I just stared, too furious to even speak. When I confronted Karen at the next HOA meeting, she didn't even try to hide her smugness. Property lines can be fluid, she said to the board, pretending to talk to them but keeping her eyes locked on me. This lake belongs to the community spirit, not one individual's personal amusement. A few neighbors nodded. Some avoided looking at me altogether. Karen had already poisoned the well, whispering that I was being selfish for not wanting to share my lakefront. I tried to explain. I showed them the papers. The deed, the original survey, even an old black and white photo of my grandfather standing by that very path with his fishing rod. None of it mattered. Karen had already made up her mind, and when Karen made up her mind, the board followed like obedient ducklings. The fine started 2 days later. $150, unauthorized attempted access to restricted HOA property. $300, damaging HOA property, attempting to remove barrier. I hadn't touched the barrier. I hadn't even gone near it since the meeting. They were fabricating charges to make me fold. And then came the threats. Karen herself left a voicemail one night, her voice syrupy but edged with steel. Consider this your formal warning. If you continue trespassing, the board will have no choice but to pursue legal action. We will not tolerate hostility toward the community's safety measures. Hostility. That was her word for me fishing at the same lake I'd been visiting since childhood. But here's the thing about people like Karen, they never think further than the tip of their own power trip. They're so obsessed with control, with proving a point, that they forget about basic common sense. Because that same narrow dirt road they blocked off with their precious steel barrier. It wasn't just my lake access. It was the only road wide enough for emergency vehicles to reach the back side of the subdivision, Karen's side. The rest of the neighborhood was a maze of narrow, tree-choked lanes, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, let alone a fire truck. I told her. I warned her at the meeting, standing right there while she pretended not to listen. You block this road, I said, my voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear, and you're blocking yourself. One day you're going to need that road, and when that day comes, don't look at me for help. Karen just gave me that infuriating smile and said, oh, we have everything under control. But control is an illusion, and Mother Nature doesn't care about HOA rules. The first sign of what was coming arrived on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my back porch, nursing a beer, when I smelled it, faint at first, carried on the breeze. Smoke. Somewhere beyond the pines, a thin gray ribbon curled into the sky, barely visible in the twilight. I set down the bottle and stood. My stomach sank. Brushfire season had been brutal this year, hot, dry, and windy. I stared at that smoke for a long time, my pulse pounding. Karen had ignored every warning. And now, standing there with the acrid smell growing stronger, I already knew what was about to happen. Because once fire starts moving through dry pine, it doesn't stop. And if the fire trucks couldn't get through that road, neither could Karen. And neither could anyone else. The smoke grew thicker by the next morning. From my porch, I could see a faint orange haze settling over the treetops, sunlight filtering through it like an omen. The air tasted dry, metallic, the way it does before a storm, except this wasn't a storm. It was heat and wind and a fire creeping closer by the hour. I knew better than to panic. I'd lived near these woods long enough to recognize early warnings. But the HOA? They were too busy bickering over hedge heights to notice nature preparing to slap them across the face. By noon, I drove to the main community center for the emergency HOA meeting Karen had hastily called. The smell of smoke followed me all the way there, clinging to my clothes, but inside the clubhouse, you'd think we were discussing lawn maintenance. Karen stood at the front with her usual clipboard, addressing the dozen residents who bothered to show up. Her pastel cardigan was perfectly pressed, her pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights, as if dressing like a Stepford wife could keep the flames away. Residents, she began, her tone brisk, we are aware of the controlled burn occurring several miles to the west. I have already spoken to the county fire department, and they assure me there is no immediate threat to our neighborhood. However, please refrain from unnecessary panic. I raised my hand. Karen, that's not a controlled burn. That's an active wildfire. You can smell it. Her eyes cut to me like daggers. Mr. Harper, I would appreciate it if you refrain from fear-mongering. We are in communication with the proper authorities. I stood anyway. You need to clear the emergency access road now. If that fire jumps the ridge, this is the only way trucks can get to the west end. You know that. A few residents shifted uncomfortably. One older man, Mr. Jennings, whose house sat 2 lots down from Karen's, nodded. He's right, Karen. That road's the only straight shot through. Karen's smile tightened, but her voice stayed syrupy. The barrier is a necessary security measure. We cannot allow unrestricted access to private community roads, especially during times of potential unrest. Looters, vagrants. Looters. I cut in, my voice rising despite myself. It's not looters you should be worried about. It's a fire moving at 30 miles an hour. The trucks won't be able to make it through the back streets, you know that, Karen. The room buzzed with murmurs. A few residents looked nervous now, whispering to each other. Karen saw it too, and she didn't like losing control. The board has voted, she snapped, her sweet tone cracking just a little. The barrier stays until further notice. If and when an evacuation is ordered, we will consider temporarily removing it under supervision. Consider. I repeated, incredulous. Karen, this isn't a game. If that fire jumps the line, you won't have time to consider anything. She ignored me, shuffling papers like the discussion was over. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for your cooperation. I stood there, stunned, as people trickled out. Some avoided my gaze, others shot me apologetic looks, as if silently admitting they agreed but were too afraid to challenge her. Typical. Karen thrived on intimidation. She'd built her little kingdom on it. When I left, the sky was darker than it should have been for late afternoon. Ash drifted in the air like gray snowflakes. My gut twisted as I drove past that cursed steel barrier on my way home. It stood there gleaming in the smoke-hazed sunlight, mocking me. That night, the fire jumped the ridge. I was sitting in my kitchen, scrolling through weather updates, when my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Mandatory evacuation, Pine Ridge West, wildfire approaching. I bolted outside. The sky glowed orange, the tops of the pines lit from behind like a nightmare sunrise. A low roar rolled through the woods, the sound of wind pushing fire downhill. From my porch, I could already hear sirens in the distance. By the time I reached the end of my driveway, my headlights caught something moving fast down the main road, a line of fire trucks, their lights flashing, roaring toward the west side of the neighborhood. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Then I remembered the barrier. I jumped into my truck and followed, gravel spitting under my tires as I pushed faster than I should have. My stomach tightened as we turned toward the lake road. And there it was. The truck slowed to a crawl in front of that steel monstrosity, their headlights glaring off the padlocked chain. Firefighters jumped out, shouting to each other, trying to figure out what to do. Behind the trucks, I could already see residents pouring out of their homes, some dragging kids, others throwing suitcases into car trunks. Smoke thickened, rolling low and fast now. People were shouting, coughing. Then I saw her. Karen, standing in her driveway in a silk robe and slippers, staring wide-eyed at the fire trucks. Her perfect hair was frizzed from the heat, and for the first time since I'd met her, her face wasn't smug. It was pale. A firefighter ran up to her, yelling, "Where's the key to this gate? We need to get through." Karen's mouth opened and closed. She pointed helplessly toward the clubhouse. "The board has it, there's a process." "A process?" the firefighter snapped. "Lady, we don't have time for a process." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because this was exactly what I had warned her about. Exactly. And as the fire trucks idled, lights flashing in the growing smoke, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because while Karen stood there fumbling for excuses, the fire wasn't slowing down. It was coming. And it wasn't going to wait for an HOA vote. The heat hit first. Standing there by my truck, watching the fire trucks idle behind that damned gate, I felt the air shift, hotter, drier, almost sucking the moisture out of my lungs. Ash drifted thicker now, swirling in angry little eddies with every gust of wind. The glow in the distance wasn't just on the horizon anymore, it was spilling over the treetops, a pulsating wall of orange and black. The fire was coming fast. "Move that gate," a firefighter barked, his voice sharp over the roar of the trucks. He yanked at the steel barrier, but the heavy padlock held. Two others tried cutting the chain with bolt cutters, but the steel links were too thick. Someone shouted for the saws, and within seconds, sparks were flying as they tried to cut through the metal. I glanced toward the cluster of neighbors gathering in the street. Panic was spreading through them like a second wildfire. People were throwing suitcases into car trunks, shouting at kids to hurry, calling for pets that had slipped from their grasp. A woman 2 houses down was screaming her husband's name, her voice breaking over the chaos. And Karen? Karen was frozen. She stood on her porch, one hand clutching her phone, the other pressed to her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from leaping out. Her robe was streaked with ash, her blonde bob sticking to her forehead. She wasn't barking orders anymore, she wasn't holding court with her precious clipboard. She just stood there, trembling, as the consequences of her arrogance bore down on her. I strode over, coughing into my sleeve. "Karen," I said sharply, "do you have the key?" She turned toward me, eyes wide, almost childlike. The board president has it," she stammered. "It's locked in the clubhouse, we keep it for emergencies only." "This is an emergency." I snapped. She flinched, her gaze darting to the trucks, to the firefighters still cutting, to the orange glow creeping closer through the trees. I didn't think. "No," I cut her off, my voice low and hard. "You didn't. And now everyone else is going to pay for it." Her lips trembled like she wanted to argue, but another gust of hot wind stole her words. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was survival. A firefighter shouted, "We're not going to make it through in time, we need to reroute." "Where?" another called back. The west lanes are too narrow, we'll never. The rest of his words were swallowed by a sound I'll never forget, a deep, rolling whoosh as the fire crested the ridge behind the lake. Flames licked skyward, jumping from pine to pine like they were alive, hunting. The wind shifted hard, pushing smoke and embers toward us. The air turned sharp with burning sap. Someone screamed. A little boy clutched his mother's leg, crying as ash dusted his hair. Go. Get in your cars, a firefighter yelled, motioning for people to move. But not everyone could leave. Not everyone had packed, and now the road was jammed, SUVs and minivans trying to squeeze past one another, horns blaring as people panicked. It was chaos. Then, above it all, came a single chilling moment. The first house caught fire. It was Jennings' place, just past Karen's, a 2-story wood frame house that lit up like a torch when an ember landed on its roof. The flames climbed fast, curling around the eaves, devouring the cedar shingles. Jennings himself stood in the yard for a second, just staring, before a firefighter pulled him back. Karen gasped, stumbling backward like she'd been struck. Her own house was only 3 doors away. I watched her stare at the flames, her chest heaving, her perfect HOA world crumbling in front of her eyes. The neighbors she'd lorded over were screaming, running, throwing buckets of water on dry lawns that were never going to stop what was coming. This was it. This was the moment I had warned her about. Please. Karen's voice cracked as she ran toward the firefighters. You have to do something. That's my street, my house. A firefighter turned on her, face streaked with sweat and soot. Ma'am, we can't get through. You blocked our access road. We're doing what we can. Karen's mouth fell open. For a heartbeat, she just stood there, the truth hitting her harder than the smoke ever could. Her road. Her gate. Her rules. And now, her mistake. The fire roared closer, devouring the tree line, sparks raining across rooftops. One truck finally managed to saw through half the chain, but by then, the flames had leapt to a second house. Karen collapsed to her knees in the street, ash swirling around her. She looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with soot, and for the first time since I'd moved here, she didn't look like an untouchable queen of the neighborhood. She looked small. Weak. Terrified. You were right, she whispered hoarsely. I didn't say anything. I just watched as the firefighters finally tore through the barrier, their trucks lurching forward toward the blaze. But for some of those houses, for some of those families, it was already too late. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the smoke hung low over the neighborhood like a shroud. Sirens had finally faded, replaced by the hiss of smoldering ruins and the occasional crack of collapsing wood. The air reeked of wet ash and scorched pine. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the muffled sobs of people standing in front of what used to be their homes. For houses were gone. Jennings' place was a blackened skeleton, the roof caved in, windows shattered, walls warped and charred. 2 more homes further down Karen's street were nothing but smoldering piles of rubble, and another, Karen's neighbor, the Andersons, had half its siding peeled away, smoke still curling from the rafters. Karen's house had survived, barely. The fire had scorched one side, black streaks clawing up the exterior like angry fingers. Her manicured lawn, once the envy of the neighborhood, was a patchwork of burned grass and muddy ash from where firefighters had sprayed to keep the flames at bay. She stood in her driveway, staring at the damage, her silk robe replaced by a borrowed blanket from emergency services. Her perfect hair was gone, her bob was frizzed and streaked gray from soot. She looked like a ghost of the woman who used to stride around issuing fines and citations. I should have felt sorry for her. I didn't. Not when I thought about Jennings, sitting on his curb with his head in his hands, staring at the ruins of his family photos and everything he'd worked for. Not when I thought about the Anderson kids crying as they hugged their soot-stained dog. And definitely not when I thought about how preventable this all was. By mid-morning, the HOA emergency meeting was called. People crammed into the clubhouse, some still wearing masks from the smoke, others wrapped in blankets, coughing. The room buzzed with anger, a low, simmering fury that hadn't yet boiled over. Karen sat at the front table, her clipboard gone, her hands trembling as she gripped a plastic water bottle. Her voice cracked when she started speaking. We suffered significant losses last night. But I want to assure you. Assure us? A man in the back, Jennings, his voice raw, stood up abruptly. You assured us last week that this roadblock was for our safety. Now my house is gone. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's lips trembled. The fire department. The fire department told you to clear that road months ago, another neighbor snapped. You ignored them. You ignored him. She pointed at me, and heads turned. Karen's eyes darted toward me. For a moment, it looked like she might deny it, like she might fall back on her usual smug arrogance. But then the room erupted. You had no right to block that road. You cost us our homes. People could have died, Karen. Karen flinched with every word, shrinking in her chair. The clipboard queen who once commanded this room with icy authority now looked like a scolded child. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jennings demanded, his voice shaking. I've lived here 20 years. My house, my wife's memories, are ashes because of you. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. No excuses, no smug rules lawyering. Just silence. I stood. I warned you, I said, my voice calm but carrying over the room. I showed you the deed, the survey, even county maps. That road was never yours to block. I told you exactly what would happen if you didn't clear it. Karen finally spoke, her voice small. I thought I was protecting the community. Protecting us? Jennings barked a bitter laugh. You protected your rules. That's all you've ever cared about. The room murmured again, louder this time. A few people clapped, others nodded. Someone muttered, she should resign. Karen's head snapped toward them, panic flashing across her face. Wait, I can fix this. No, Jennings said, standing straighter. You can't fix burned houses. But you can step down. The room erupted into agreement, shouts of resign, filling the air. Karen's cheeks flushed red as she looked around, realizing she'd lost the room. Her power. Her control. Everything she'd built her ego on was crumbling. She stood shakily, knocking over her water bottle. Fine, she said, voice trembling. If that's what you want. It's not just what we want, Jennings said coldly. It's what you deserve. Karen looked like she might cry, but no one reached to comfort her. No one defended her. And as she stepped down from that table, clutching her blanket like a shield, I realized something. For the first time, Karen Whitmore wasn't in charge of anything, not even herself. Outside, as people trickled out, Jennings stopped me. You tried to warn us, he said quietly, his eyes tired. I should have backed you sooner. I shook my head. It's not your fault. She made the choice. He nodded slowly. Still, thank you for trying. As he walked away, I glanced back at Karen standing alone by the clubhouse steps. She looked up, meeting my eyes for just a second before quickly looking away. There were no words between us. None were needed. She knew exactly what she had done. The smell of smoke lingered for days. Even after the fire was contained, a gray haze hung over the neighborhood, clinging to roofs, settling into gutters like a reminder no one wanted. Most people stayed indoors, coughing and sweeping ash off porches, but I spent my mornings at the lake. The roadblock was gone, firefighters had cut it apart, leaving twisted steel on the ground like a broken monument to Karen's arrogance. The first morning after the fire, I walked that dirt path, crunching through charred pine needles, the lake surface perfectly still. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. By the end of the week, the news vans arrived. Local reporters parked near the clubhouse, their cameras catching images of burned homes and exhausted residents. Interviews played on the evening news, tearful families, angry neighbors, and then, inevitably, Karen. I watched the clip on my phone, sitting on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee. Karen stood in front of her scorched siding, her perfect posture gone, her once pristine cardigan streaked with soot. I only wanted to protect the neighborhood, she stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward the camera. The road closure was meant to keep everyone safe from outsiders. The reporter didn't hold back. But the fire department confirmed the blocked road delayed emergency response. Do you accept responsibility for that? Karen froze. Her lips moved like she wanted to speak, but no words came. The video cut to Jennings, his voice steady but cold. She blocked the only access road we had. Because of that, 4 families lost their homes. You tell me who's responsible. That night, the clip went viral on local social media pages. Comments flooded in, most of them brutal. She should be sued. Classic HOA power trip gone wrong. Imagine losing your house because of a gate. Karen didn't show her face in public after that. But karma wasn't done with her. The following week, I got an envelope in the mail, a legal notice. Not for me. For Karen. Word spread fast. Jennings and 2 other families were filing a lawsuit against the HOA for negligence. I wasn't surprised when a second envelope arrived 2 days later, a certified letter from the county. The investigation had concluded the HOA violated local emergency access regulations. Fines were coming, along with a mandatory restructuring of the board. And Karen? She was finished. I passed by her house once, just to see. Her lawn, once obsessively trimmed, was overgrown with weeds. A "for sale" sign leaned crookedly in the yard. Through the window, I glimpsed Karen sitting on her couch, shoulders slumped, staring at nothing. The woman who once ruled this neighborhood like a queen now looked like a prisoner in her own home. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I can't say I felt bad either. A week later, I was back at the lake. The air was clean again, the breeze carrying the scent of pine instead of smoke. I sat at the water's edge, fishing rod in hand, the same way I had before all this began. For a moment, I almost forgot the past few weeks, the shouting, the fines, the chaos. The lake didn't care about HOA politics. It just existed, calm and eternal, outlasting every human ego that tried to control it. As the sun dipped low, painting the water gold, I heard footsteps behind me. Jennings approached, holding a thermos. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, sitting beside me. His face was tired, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been since the fire. "You're staying?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "We'll rebuild. But things are going to change. No more power trips. No more Karen. We're rewriting the bylaws, starting fresh." He looked at me. "You were right all along. I just wish we'd listened sooner." I cast my line, watching the ripples spread. Sometimes people have to feel the fire before they understand the warning. He nodded at that, silent for a moment. Then he glanced back toward the neighborhood, where Karen's house stood in quiet ruin. "Think she'll ever come back from this?" I didn't look away from the lake. "Maybe. But sometimes," I said, my voice calm, "karma doesn't knock. It burns the door down." And with that, the lake lapped gently at the shore, as if agreeing with me, a quiet witness to the fall of an empire built on arrogance.